My current address is 1106 J Street, Lake Worth, Florida. And let me get started. So my organization, South Florida Wildlands, has a long-standing and well-publicized opposition to these new reactors, to the power lines in or near Everglades National Park, and the power lines through the residential sections of Miami-Dade. The location of this plant, the proposed plant, on the shores of Biscayne Bay, adjacent to Biscayne National Park, the power lines on the west side would be through the eastern side of Everglades National Park. Mark Lewis, the former superintendent of Biscayne National Park, now retired, we had a long conversation about this, and he said something very profound. Even if he supported nuclear power, why in the world would you want to build one in this particular location? And I'm going to spend some time talking about why Superintendent Lewis had this feeling about the location for this plan, for this proposed project. Biscayne Bay is an ecosystem on life support. Urban runoff from cars, roads, buildings, and power plants, agricultural runoff surrounding farmlands, plus massive amounts of runoff coming from the Everglades agricultural area, brought to the northern bay by the Miami River, and the hypersaline conditions caused by the lack of clean fresh water is destroying this bay and estuary. In historical times, the bay was one of the most biodiverse estuaries on the planet. Threatened and endangered and state-listed species, which are still hanging on in Biscayne Bay, but barely, include 3 species of corals, 3 terrestrial invertebrates, a fish species, 8 reptiles, including 5 species of endangered sea turtles, 13 birds, 6 marine mammals, including the manatee, and 2 terrestrial mammals. This is the biodiversity of the bay adjacent to this plant. There are many, many other species not yet listed, but which could be in the future. Consider also when our 80 million Floridian tourists send postcards home, these are the animals, this is the landscape that are on those postcards that they're sending home, not photos of a nuclear plant. The tourist industry is a tremendous part of our economy. FP&L is citing this expansion on some of the best of what's left. The proposed plant anticipates cooling with recycled wastewater. That water will not be pure, and some of the chemicals that are in it, including detergents and pharmaceuticals, could well be released as aerosols in the 2 steam cooling towers, with unknown but serious consequences for the bay, the ecosystem, and the health of the community. Also, there's the strong possibility of small microorganisms, including viruses, being released with the extremely fine aerosol droplets that can be part of this wastewater and spreading far. The droplets will not evaporate as due to our high humidity. That issue has been studied in cooling towers in the past, and the dangers identified. All the reference I'm going to make, by the way, I'm going to send you a physical copy of this with references to study that back up what I'm talking about. The backup system also calls for the cooling for radio wells drawing water from the Biscayne aquifer beneath Biscayne Bay. Strong potential for increase to South Dade's already massive saltwater intrusion problem. The proposal envisions sending 40 million gallons per day of the wastewater into the boulder zone beneath the Biscayne aquifer. Problem is the water will not necessarily stay there. This has been well studied. There's evidence of lateral movement into the Florida Straits, one of the most biodiverse marine areas in the Atlantic, and of course into Biscayne Bay itself. 2009 study, which actually looked at this area, showed vertical movement of deep well injected wastewater in this very location. Potential for contamination of freshwater supplies is very real. In July 2013, a brand new study released by the USGS, just released, showed the strong potential of deep well injection to dramatically increase earthquake occurrences. The area that was studied, more than 300 earthquakes per year above magnitude 3.0 from 2010 to 2012 in the area studied, compared to 21 events per year between 1967 and 2000. The culprit is thought to be deep well injection caused by the fracking industry, pumping waste underground. Florida is not in a known seismic area, but seismic events have occurred on the peninsula, and the very fact that Florida was once part of Northwest Africa shows the movement of the peninsula that has occurred in geological time. There is risk. We also dump hundreds of millions of gallons of municipal wastewater per day in deep well injection wells, adding to the underground pressure. The boulder zone is not of infinite capacity. Other risks include the thousands of pounds of still radioactive spent fuel rods piling up on the shores of Biscayne Bay even right now in either pools or dry caskets. There is no way to move them for long-term storage. And the expansion will dramatically increase the amount of rods piling up in that location. The half-life of U-235, the hard-to-find but fissionable isotope of uranium, which has to be refined from the usual uranium that's found in nature, and which makes both nuclear reactors and bombs do their thing, has a half-life of over 700 million years. So even after 700 million years, it's still half as radioactive as when it was put into storage. to dangerous toxic substance. The safety record of this company with regard to FBNL and regard to nuclear power in this particular site, Turkey Point, is not great. Over 3 million people live within the 50-mile ingestion zone. Ingestion zone, that's a term of the NRC, and they cannot be evacuated quickly and easily. Here's the NRC report from the effects of Hurricane Andrew that hit the facility, direct hit back in 1992. The on-site damage included loss of all on-site power, off-site power for more than 5 days, complete loss of communication systems, and damage to the fire protection and security systems in warehouse facilities. As we know from Fukushima, it was the damage to the backup generators coupled with loss of power that didn't allow the cooling pumps to work, which led to the catastrophic meltdown of both the core material and the spent fuel rods. This is in the direct path of a hurricane with rising seas, rising storm surges. It can definitely happen here. You're going to hear FBNL talk about safety. FBNL's idea of safe needs to be taken with a very, very large grain of salt here. There is risk. A smokestack, by the way, from one of the fossil fuel plants that got hit had to be demolished due to damage. Other safety problems which have occurred on the site include a hole which was apparently drilled by a worker in one of the cooling pipes for the plant. It was done either by accident or on purpose. Nobody knows. The FBI investigated and interviewed dozens and dozens of workers. And a situation where Turkey Point officials realized that the Voraflex panels that are used in the spent fuel pools to absorb the neutrons and keep the U-235 from fissioning was breaking down. They took it on their own to add a soluble boron compound, a boron solution, to the pools without notifying the NRC about the problem, nor about the solution that they came up with. The NRC fined them $70,000. I'm a poor guy. That's almost within the range of a fine I could pay. That was for taking their own solution without contacting the agency to find out. So their safety record and their behavior with regard to this plant is not great. Lastly, the power lines across the eastern edge of Everglades National Park. This should not even be an issue. When the National Park Service acquired the East Everglades expansion area, they were directed by Congress to acquire all the land within that area, including these corridors. That was clear. What happened was hundreds of properties, by the way, were acquired in the same area, either by willing sellers or eminent domain. When NPS tried to use their power of eminent domain to acquire this property, FBNL just basically said, no, we ain't giving it up. They got a bill from the NPS saying, this is what we'll give you for it. They basically said no. They got 2 senators, Senator Martinez, Senator Nelson, to come up with a bill, and came up with a bill called the Everglades Land Swap, which allowed them to swap out that corridor inside Everglades National Park, and they would take over the eastern side of Everglades National Park in exchange for that corridor. Not many people can get Congress to write a bill signed by President Obama in 2009 to transfer a piece of National Park Service property on their behalf, but that did happen. Lastly, also the power lines, it's going to change. If they do put those power lines in there, it's going to change the hydrology of Chalk River Slough. That's the heart of the park and the main beneficiary of the entire multi-billion-dollar Everglades National Park Restoration Plan and Everglades Restoration Plan in general. It will spread invasive plant species through that section of the park. Impacts to avian species in the form of electrocutions and collisions. There are 3 known colonies of wood storks in the vicinity of these power lines that will be impacted. NPS wrote a very long avian impact study that I think you need to look at when looking at this entire project. It will also create a new industrialized eastern horizon for the park, a marred landscape for the thousands, the hundreds of thousands of visitors who visit this area, and that will be an impact whether it's the Everglades National Park corridor or the one further to the east. There's many other projects, many other consequences for this project. We're asking you basically to deny the permit. We think that this project is unsafe, it's ecologically damaging, and not in the public interest. The application for construction and operating license for Turkey Points Units 6 and 7 should be denied. Thank you.